doesn't give us the name, so I'm going to make you wait a minute. But John gives us a name, which Juana read for us. And if you were paying attention, you already know who I'm talking about. But we're going to get into this. But I want you to think, as we go through this, about that question, have you ever done anything for Jesus extravagantly? Because I want to challenge you to consider it. I want you to think about it. Not for me, not for show, though, as you'll see, it will probably end up being public, but for the reason that he is simply worth it. That's the only reason you and I need. He is worth it. Okay? So with that, let's jump in. And today we're, again, in Mark 14, starting in the very first verse. We're going to read through 11 verses. And this outline follows right out of the verses in order. So the first 3 verses is point 1, then 4 and 5 are point 2, and so on. So here are the 4 points right up front. So if you need to get some sleep catch-up, you'll at least have heard the 4 points. So if you're taking notes. So the bottom line is this, is that true followers of Christ, they worship Jesus through extravagant acts of sacrificial love. Okay, so just through extravagant acts of sacrificial love. That's how true worshipers, true followers of Christ worship him. And there's 4 things that happen through extravagant acts of love. So that's the main line, and then there are going to be 4 things that fall out of that. So if you're writing down, you would say extravagant acts of love, ... will. So extravagant acts of love will, number 1, be public. Extravagant acts of love, number 2, will be criticized. Extravagant acts of love will, number 3, be remembered. And number 4, extravagant acts of love will be contrasted with betrayal. So now there's a little tension too. Awesome. All right, let's go. Let's jump into here. Okay, here we go. Starting in the first couple of verses. Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away. Remember, we're in the Passion Week, and that means this is the week leading up to the cross and the resurrection. And the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. I don't know what the normal population of Jerusalem was at the time. I'm thinking in the tens of thousands, okay? I don't think it was massive, but it was no small, insignificant city. But during this week, the population would swell to, some estimates are as high as 3 million people. Now, I have no idea where they fit those people, but I know that some of it spilled into the area around. A lot of Enoch camping probably happened, and Bethany and Bethphage were very 2 close villages, and probably Bethlehem too, where people would have just stayed. 3 million people. If you were a Jewish male and you were within 15 miles during any of the festivals, you were required to be there. So there's a lot of people in this vicinity. And there's 2 groups of people that got really nervous when that happened. Number 1, the Jewish leaders, which would see the chief priests and the scribes or the teachers of the law. They made up a group of 70 called the Sanhedrin. And they liked the status quo arrangement with Rome because they came out pretty, it was lucrative for them. So they liked that. The other group of people that were even more nervous were the Romans, because the Romans, they do not like revolution. That's why they invented the cross, or used the cross to discourage rebellions and revolutions. They would just hang you on a cross if you were threatening that. But, let's face it, they can't stand up to 3 million motivated Jews. If they wanted to do anything, it wasn't going to be good for the Romans. So they were always very nervous, and they would send in more troops to try to keep the crowds under control. And so the religious leaders, they're smart in knowing, okay, we want to make sure we don't do anything that will unsettle the crowd with Jesus. We'll just wait till everybody leaves, and then we'll arrest him and kill him. So they got it all figured out, they think, except they still don't know how they're going to do it. But that problem will be solved very soon from an unlikely source. So the verse 3 here says that while he was in Bethany, while Jesus was in Bethany, it's like, whoa, I thought we were just in Jerusalem. I'll answer that. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him, and I'm going to stop there. So why is he in Bethany? So what's happening here is not clear until you read John. So in John's account, we find out that the unnamed woman that's getting ready to be described of what she does. Her name is Mary. Mary, not the mother of Jesus. Mary, the sister to Martha and sister to Lazarus, who died and Jesus raised from the dead. Okay? And they were all three, those three siblings were very good friends of Jesus. They're tight, okay? Whenever Jesus was in Jerusalem, he would go stay with them, and they would take good care of Jesus. He liked them, they liked him, and that was just like really, really tight folks there, okay? So so Jesus is in Bethany. Now the timing is interesting. The 2 days that is referred to in the first couple of verses here is referring to the first couple of verses here. But it's not referring to verses 3 through 9. You go back to and read the account in John, and John says 6 days before the Passover, this happens. So this is really a flashback is all I'm trying to say. Okay? So think Passion Week, and then go back to the Friday before. That's where this is happening. Okay? So this actually happens before the widow drops the coins in the temple. Because remember, that happens during the Passion Week, which we preached about a few weeks ago. This is actually right before that. But Mark arranges it here, and this is the gospel writers doing this under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Mark arranges this thematically because he's going to make some points that are going to line up with what's getting ready to happen in Jesus' life. Something to do with the cross and things like that, right? So now as we get into this, but the point in it being in Bethany and that there's this big meal is it happens publicly. And when extravagant acts of worship happen, they're usually going to be public because they're so extravagant. By definition, people are going to see it happen. And that's what happens here. If there was a National Enquirer, they would already be writing the story. Okay, here we go. Flashback, verse 3. While Jesus was in Bethany, reclining at the table. Now, I'm not encouraging you to do this. Okay, Tristan, when you're at home, don't recline at the table, okay? This is something you can say, well, Jesus was reclining. Why can't I recline at the table? I know you're disappointed. That's the way they did it. They had really low tables, and so they had these either mats on the floor or low couches, which is really strange to me, and they would lay on their left elbow and eat with their right hand, okay? Because the left hand, I guess, I don't know if it was unclean or it was just, don't do that. Eat with your right hand. And so they're all kind of leaning on their side. I don't know if I can relate to this. I remember being younger and eating popcorn in front of the TV, laying on one arm, and it goes to sleep. You ever had that happen? And you're just like tingling, and it's like, oh no, now it's going to be up all night. But so that's the kind of thing I always think about when I think about this. But that's important because of what's getting ready to happen. I don't know how tall Mary was, but that was certainly helpful to her, I would think. All right, so they're in Bethany, which is just a couple of miles away from Jerusalem, in this village, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper. Now, you tell me, you think he's got leprosy or not? Would you go if he had leprosy? Probably not. Okay, so he's probably known as Simon the leper because he used to be, and Jesus healed him. We don't know. We're not sure. Good chance that this was one of the lepers that he healed. And we also are wondering, but we don't know, many have speculated, that he also may be the father to Mary, Martha, Lazarus. It's interesting because he's hosting this meal with Jesus, the 12 disciples, and Mary is there. So it's fine, it's like, how did Mary get in on this? She probably knew Jesus was coming and found a way to get there. I'm sure she's helping in the back. Well, probably not. But you know what I'm saying. She wanted to be wherever Jesus was because every time we find Mary, where is she? Anybody know? Every time we find Mary, where is she? She's at Jesus' feet. Wow, y'all can, okay, what's next? You guys are good. That is impressive. I don't even have to tell you what the 3 instances were. Okay, since you asked. All right, so the first time was in Luke 10 when Mary's serving and she's working hard in the kitchen. She keeps looking out and Mary's sitting out at Jesus' feet listening to Jesus teach. And so Martha's stewing in the back, no pun intended, and she comes out and they had that big altercation. The second one is in John 11. Lazarus has just died a couple days earlier. Jesus shows up, what appears to be late, and she's clinging to his feet, and she's weeping, and she's like, if only you'd been here, he'd be alive. And then the third time is John 12, which is this story, which is here she is at his feet. Again, what is she doing at his feet? Well, in this story, it says his head. In that story, it says his feet, which tells us she was busy because she, from head to toe, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. So there they are in Simon the leper's house. A woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar, poured the perfume on his head. Okay? So this is what I know about the nard. I don't use that word, but I know a little. Perfume, I've used that word. And so what this is a very expensive perfume. probably fairly thick. Now, good hospitality was not, we don't do good hospitality these days mostly. But when you'd go into a home there, especially for a meal or if you're staying over, they would give you a drop or two of perfume. Everybody would get, guys too, we all get a little bit of perfume. And if you lived back then and you walked on those roads with all those animals and all those apples on the road, you probably need some perfume, especially when you got 14 men in one room, okay? At the end of the day, it's not smelling good without some perfume. But so that would have not been unusual. What is unusual is the amount that she used. So it says that she comes in and she has this alabaster jar. So first of all, an alabaster jar is a fancy, and it depends on what you read as far as what it's made of, stone or some other breakable, but it's breakable, and it's in this real fancy, probably real expensive jar, flask of some kind, and it's probably got 12 to 16 ounces of a very expensive perfume. Now, when we were in Curacao a few years ago, I finally, and I've been there several times and never done this, I finally bought Anita some perfume, okay? I'm just really cheap. I'm just, but I said, well, I'm going to get her some really nice perfume. And it was just like an ounce or two. It was expensive, but I mean, it wasn't ridiculous. Well, it was to me, but to her, it was appropriate. So, yeah, I'm in trouble. I'm going to stop right now. She is worth it. So it's expensive, but not like this. Not like this. She takes the flask. Now, and I think this is like made from a really rare plant in India. That's nowhere close to the Middle East. She's got this flask. Now, I don't know where she gets it, but we suspect that it's an heirloom passed down from generation to generation because women didn't make money back then. They worked and worked and worked, but they didn't make money. They just helped with the family. And so something as expensive as this item would have probably been passed down from a father or a grandfather as part of an inheritance. Okay? And it would basically be her equivalent of Social Security, retirement, profit sharing, savings account, emergency fund, insurance accounts or policies, all rolled into one, so that if ever she was without a father, a son, a brother, or a son-in-law, she could still take care of herself because this would provide a bunch of money. And you say, well, how much is this worth? Well, if you read a little bit beyond, he writes this. Some of those present, and this is where the criticism comes in, some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. And they rebuked her harshly. Now, we'll get to the criticism in a minute. But the value of this, so if you work at 300 days' wages, so if you have a Bible and it's got a footnote, it probably says a denarii, 300 denarii or however you say it. Okay, and a denarii is worth 1 day's wages for a laborer. So let's just say maybe a contractor. And somebody who works for a contractor is probably better, okay? Somebody he's carrying boards around and bricks, the guys that you always see leaning on shovels, one of those guys, okay? So let's say they make $15 an hour, work 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, because their work week was 6 days, not 5, okay? They had only one Sabbath, and so 6 days a week, so 300 days a year, minus festivals and holidays, okay? It works out to about, so $15 an hour, 8 hours a day, do the math real quick, you get about $36,000 of perfume in that alabaster jar. See what I'm saying? It's nothing like what I was looking at in Curacao, I promise. Okay? That's a lot of money. That isn't perfume. That is your retirement plan. And, of course, we see what she did. She brought it out, and she didn't uncork it and use some of it. She broke it. Now, I don't know how she did it. I don't think she threw it on the floor because she then used it. So my gut is she somehow tapped something and broke the top off on purpose because her point is none of this is going to be used for anyone else because it's not worthy of anybody else. And I'm using the whole bottle. And she puts some on his head according to here. In John, it goes on on Jesus' feet, and she uses her hair to wipe and anoint his feet. And so, I mean, you can only imagine there's a lot there. You might as well all over, right? I mean, he's letting her do this. You and I look at that and we go, that seems like an extraordinary waste of $36,000. Some perfume, it's going to be gone. He's going to eventually bathe, I hope. So he brings out the critics. So extravagant acts of love are going to be public. This one is in a home, but it is going to become public really quickly. It also brings criticism. So what happens? What do they say? Some of those, I'm in verse 4, some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. They rebuked her harshly. Now, your first reaction might be, well, yeah, that's actually a good idea. We could have used the money for the poor. There's plenty of poor. Look at Jesus' reply. And we'll just start with some of it. Leave her alone. I don't imagine he said it as mildly as I did. Jesus, why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. Because he understands the symbolism. He understands the prophetic part of this, even though she probably doesn't. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. Now, if this was coming from anybody else, I would be like, this dude needs to get over himself. But this is not just anybody else, right? This is God in the flesh. There's no one worthy of this except God in the flesh. Jesus, Son of God. And so he's saying, she's honoring me. What she's done is beautiful, and you're criticizing her. You're basically saying they're demeaning her because she made this decision, and they're actually demeaning Jesus because they're saying he's not worthy of it. Now, it still feels a little bit like a waste. Yeah, it still could have helped out the poor, and Jesus' point is, yeah, but you're not always going to have me. The opportunities to show the proper worship to me are not going to be very often. In fact, they're not going to be much longer. And she sensed this. She realized, I don't think I'm going to have him around much longer. And so he's not saying that there's anything wrong with and that we shouldn't help the poor. He's saying, let's keep this in the right perspective. Okay? Creature, creator. There's a big difference in who we honor and how we do it. Okay? Now, Jesus isn't here, so now we take it and we minister to him by ministering to the poor. So there's not a tension either or here. There shouldn't be. The tension isn't the poor or not. The tension is in the words always and not always. Okay? So extravagant acts of love are public, number one. Extravagant acts of love are criticized, number two. And number three, extravagant acts of love are remembered. Let's keep looking at Jesus' words. Back to verse 6. Leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. Even though she's broken protocol, she shouldn't even be in the room because culturally that was a no-no. Unless you were serving the men, get out of the room. It's just a men's thing. I'm not saying it was good or right. I'm not saying Jesus approved. It's just the way it was in that culture. But she said, I don't care what you think or what you think or what you think. I only care what he thinks. And she went in and she had a resolve about her that is a true follower. And she did something extravagant that was extravagant love, that was an act of worship. She has done a beautiful thing to me. Verse 7, the poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. Verse 8, she did what she could. She did what she could. Look what else it says. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for burial. Now, what is Jesus saying? Cross is coming, and she is getting my body ready. What's interesting is if you flash forward to the cross and the day of the event, he hangs on the cross. He's on the cross most of the day. Now, the end of our day and the end of a Roman day is midnight, right? It's the end of the day. But in Jewish calendar reckoning, the end of the day is sundown. And the next day was the Sabbath, which meant they absolutely couldn't do any work on the Sabbath, even anoint a dead body, which was the right thing to do when you had a burial. So what happens is Jesus dies on the cross. I don't know if they get time to wash the body or not, which was the first thing you would normally do. You would wash the body, and then you would begin spices and ointments and perfumes, and you begin to wrap the body. They didn't have time to do all of that. Apparently they did a little, but not much. And then they find a tomb. They went and found a wealthy man's tomb, Joseph of Arimathea, and they took him and laid him in the tomb, rolled the stone. Of course, the tomb gets sealed. And the plan is we'll come back after the Sabbath is over, and we'll finish what we didn't get done. But what Jesus is saying is here, it's already been done. My body was already anointed. It didn't need to be anointed. And if you think about it, when they showed up to do it, his body wasn't there because it had risen, because he's not dead. It's amazing. And already, so it just shows you that is, you're like, well, how does that affect the way I live today? It doesn't affect the way you live today directly, but it absolutely shows you God is working on this. This isn't happening by accident, and God's kind of going with the flow. He's orchestrating this. He's saying, I'm so big, I can make things happen. And he sure did. And so the poor, okay, so preparing for burial, verse 9. Whenever he wants to say something really profound, which everything he says is profound, I don't know why. Truly I tell you, okay, let's pay attention, fellas. Wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Extravagant acts of love will be remembered, and not just by the Lord. Here we are, 2,000 years later, talking about a woman named Mary, and you can say, well, what has she done for me? She is challenging you right now. She is standing before you humbly saying, I just did what I knew was appropriate for the one in the room. And she's looking at you and me going, and why in the world aren't you? Because you know who he is. I was still figuring it out on the other side of the resurrection, on the other side of the cross. But she was figuring it out. You know, God always has to say the guy's names twice. He doesn't ever do that with the women. So guys, we're just a little slower on the uptake sometimes. But she gets it. And the last point is this extravagant acts of love, all right, contrast with acts of betrayal. So here's the tension that I want you, that you and I are managing, or feeling right now. I'm feeling it anyway. Okay, on this extreme, we have Mary and her great act of extravagant love. I mean, it's over the top, sacrificial, cost her everything. Just like the widow, she gave everything, but harder than the widow, in my humble opinion, because she has lots of money and she's looking at it and saying, I can do a lot with this. And she still chooses to pour it out on him. Okay? This is where we are. We don't want to do that because we look at all that we have. Anyway, I'm out of the tension. Okay, so we got this tension, and the other extreme is the disciples, but let's be honest, who was speaking out on behalf of the disciples? Especially if you read the John 12 version. Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed Jesus. He's the one who's saying, this money should have been sold, this should have been sold and the money given to the poor. And then John gives us a little parenthetical, and he was dipping into the till every chance he got. Greed, no wonder he didn't care about the poor, he cared about his own pockets, which is what motivates him to do what happens in verse 10 and 11. Okay? I'm not saying that Judas didn't have some legitimate struggles and that he didn't go back and forth. I think he was very human and a very confused man who really wanted to see some good things happen for Israel. But at the end of the day, he allowed Satan to enter him, which John and Luke both document and testify to. And because he let Satan in, he did what he did. He betrayed the Savior of the world. Okay? Also following out, showing that God is so in control that even that couldn't derail his ultimate plan. In fact, it fulfilled it. They knew it was going to happen before it happened. So we remember her, and now we have this tension. So the question that I keep asking myself, and this is the question I'm not going to answer for you because it's just for me, because I'd be embarrassed to tell you what I really think, is who do we look more like? Who do we think more like? Mary or the other guys? Because to not worship him with extravagant acts of love means we're moving in the direction of the other, betrayal. Some comment I read somewhere just blew me away. It's like the church is really, I wish I had the quote. The church is just so comfortable, and I'm in the church, I'm part of that, everybody is so comfortable with casual love towards Jesus. We're just a comfortable, yeah, I kind of give, I kind of serve, I kind of love. And I think that's kind of what lukewarm looks like. I don't know if that's a fair comparison, so I won't press it, but it feels like half-hearted. And I know Scripture talks about the difference between half-hearted and wholehearted devotion to the Lord. Mary demonstrates wholehearted devotion to the Lord. She had all of this stuff, and I would call all of this stuff her security, okay? All the financial security that you and I would, and she wastes it on Jesus, quote unquote. And she does it with a good conscience, with a clean conscience, knowing she's going to take a hit for it, and she's going to be misunderstood, and that all the guys in the room are indignant with fury. The anger level is hard to capture in words. They are so infuriated over what she just did because of the waste, because they knew how valuable what she just trashed was. Trashed being in their eyes, not in mine, not in Jesus's, and not in hers. So I'm talking to Anita at lunch today about this because she's not in here. She's working with the kids, and I said, oh man, I was wishing you were going to be in there today. She said, why? I said, well, because I like your feedback on the messages, especially when feeling convicted myself. So I'm like, I'd really love to get some help. So I told her the gist of the message, and I said, I don't want to go out and sell the house. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do something that's crazy, right? I'm just going to go sell everything. Garage sale next week, and the house is included as one of the potential estate sale, right? Is that what they call them, estate sale? We're just going to have an estate sale next weekend. And we're going to take what he gives us, and we're going to say, okay, Lord, how do you want us to use it? There's a part of me that wants to do that. Now, I got one in college, so I'm not going to do that, right? But see how quickly I could wave that off? You see how easy it was for me to justify not doing anything? And my fear is that you and I are going to all walk through those doors, and we're going to all blow it off because we're so easy to rationalize that this doesn't make sense, which is exactly how Judas and the disciples reacted to it. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? You see why this is hard? Because I feel more like them than her, and I don't like that because Jesus didn't praise them. He praised her. See, this is way more than what do you do with your money. This is what do you do with your whole life. Do you live like it's really his and he put it in your hands to steward? Or do you live like I tend to, which is it's mine and I'm going to decide how it's used because I worked and I earned it. Rah, rah, rah. You hear it? Right? There's not much gratitude in that. And he said, no, uncurl those hands. I put it there to bless you, to be a blessing. You didn't get to pick to live in America. I put you here for a reason. Wealthiest country in the history of the world, maybe with the possible exception of David's Israel, Solomon's Israel. And yet we walk around like, and we say, oh man, bills are tight this month. Gosh, don't have enough money to do this or that. God, I wish I could give this week. And well, different God? Different God than Mary's God? What's that? No, same God. God of abundance. And I'm walking around going, oh, how are we going to pay for college? And that's about all I do once a month, about 2 seconds. Anita's like, okay, I got to make these numbers work because she actually does the hard part of figuring it out so we can pay for college so that we can get Emma through so that she can earn her own money, right? So we want our kids to become, right, you see? So I'm feeling the tension that you and I feel if you're halfway awake with this passage puts in front of us. This is how it ends. Then Jesus Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. He initiates it. Now, if it was not long, I don't remember where, and I think it was in Mark, the chief priest put it out during the Passion Week. Hey, if you find Jesus out there, let us know where he is. We just want to know because we want to arrest and kill him. Oops, didn't say that out loud. And so Judas knows who to go to. And I honestly don't believe that Judas realized that Jesus would be crucified. I don't know. We don't know. But Satan's calling the shots and pulling the strings, and so I think he's just a pawn at this point. I do think he was far from Christ. Otherwise, how do you have a heart that's so open that Satan can even get in? But that's another book or sermon or something. All right, so he says, he goes to the chief priest and says, I want to betray Jesus to you. I can tell you where he's going to be and when he's going to be there so you can arrest him in secret and you won't have to worry about the crowds. That's what they wanted, and God laid it in their laps. And I say God because God was in control. This didn't happen, and God goes, oh no, what am I going to do? Oh, he's not worried. This is his plan. Verse 11, the chief priests, they were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money, which is where that was his slippery slope. And so he watched for an opportunity to hand him over, and it's so this is back to just 2 days before the Passover. So this is 2 days before the arrest. Jesus will be arrested. He'll go through the mock trials all night, and the next morning he'll be crucified. So that's what we're looking at. So there's a lot more I could say about this. Guys, I don't need to say anything else. The hard part is not hearing this. The hard part is figuring out what to do with it, right? And honestly, there's a part of me, the flesh side of me, that just loves comfortable living. I just love being a comfortable Christian in America. And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to just spend the rest of my life supporting Anita and I and watching grandkids show up. That would, right? That's a good Christian family, right? That's what everybody wants. A house is paid for, cars in the driveway, grandkids come over when you want them to. Why would we put that in jeopardy? Whatever your dream is, why would you put it in jeopardy? Why would you give God any permission whatsoever to do anything with that? And Mary takes her whole future and she breaks the jar. She breaks the jar and she says, I'm all in. And I mean, I am all his, is better said. And I want that. I want that for me. I want to be all his. I don't want to be half 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I don't want that. And I don't think you do either. But the question is, it's one thing to say I don't want that. It's another thing to live as if you don't want that. I've done a lot of things in life that have left people shaking their heads. Not all of them good. I really appreciate when, so the one time I can think of when I've done this, and it's only once, so there's no room here to pat on the back. When I decided to follow God and leave engineering and go into the ministry, the phone call I was most afraid to make was to my dad, which shows you I didn't think nearly highly enough of him. Because he and my mom had put me through college to get an engineering degree. And they were proud of me, and I was doing it. I'd been doing it for, at that point, 7 years. And was finally getting my feet under me and actually doing engineering instead of pretending. And it was going pretty well. And I was calling him to tell him and my mom that, hey, I've decided to go into the ministry and quit being an engineer. All that college money you did, thank you very much. And I was afraid, because what son doesn't want his dad's approval? I was afraid he was going to be disappointed because I wasn't using the degree he gave me, which really wasn't true or fair. And to his credit, on the spot, he responded with this great, I don't know how to say it, pride, grace, affirmation, encouragement. I don't know. I know he didn't see it. I don't know. Maybe he did see it coming. But that was kind of crazy to walk away from a career that will pay well for your kids and pay for college to a career that won't do that on paper. God has done it anyway. That's another sermon. So all of you have probably got a story like that, or you want a story like that, where you do something that doesn't make sense to most people, but because God is in it, you're okay with it. And I've gone way over. So I'm going to just nip it right here and just say this. Just don't waste the opportunity that God puts in front of you to do something that He is worthy of. Okay? Don't do that. Let's stand and let's pray. All right, we're gonna sing and we're gonna pray here, and we're gonna celebrate the Lord's Supper just as we do. Obviously, if you need to cut out, we understand, but we're not gonna end early or earlier than. We're just gonna do this. Lord Jesus, as we think about what Mary did in the story, God, we know that the reason she did it ultimately was because she saw Jesus for who He really is. For who you are, God. She could see you clearer than maybe she'd ever seen you before, and was moved to act with incredible love. And love that is expressed purely is sacrificial and great. And she did that. And you put it in writing so that we 2,000 years later could read it and be challenged by it, be inspired by it, be humbled by it. But inspired not to walk out of here with our head hung because we haven't done this maybe, but inspired because there's even more grace and mercy for us when we live with a heart like that. And so, God, my prayer is simply that we would. And I know it's all possible when we trust Christ. The Lord's Supper is our way of remembering the cost for that grace and mercy that we can have and do have. And I pray that today we would remember it even better than ever, appreciate it more than ever, and that we would walk out of these doors resolved to figure out what it looks like in our lives, because for each of us it's going to be different. May we be willing to sell it all, whether we ever do or not, because you are worthy. In Christ's name we pray.